08.
Oh, 08, okay. As an undergraduate.
Yeah, I started grad in 11.
So I guess we'll go ahead and start. You know, today is defense of Ted Liang's dissertation. Ted came in 2008 as an undergraduate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did a bunch of stuff, got his master's degree, but did a lot of that at Stanford Linear Accelerator, did this work at Stanford Linear Accelerator, and worked in the radiation safety officer, which, you know, it attributes all his success to having been part of that. But anyway, so I'll turn it over to Ted and let him make his presentation.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Attell, and just like to thank everyone for coming out to support me today, and also those of you online, thank you for tuning in. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started. So my research topic for my dissertation is the characterization of ionizing radiation generated from interaction of high-intensity laser with matter. So here's just a brief outline of what we will be covering today. So we'll start with an introduction. I'll introduce the subject matter, and then I'll go into the core of my thesis, the hot electron source characterization, Bremsstrahlung dose yield calculations, and shielding 10th value layers. So I'll touch more on these as we come along to that, and then I'll conclude with a summary. So in the introduction, we'll be covering high power laser facilities in general. Like, what does that mean? What is a high power laser? What is a high intensity laser? So those are two phrases I'll be using pretty frequently. Why are people interested? Why is the science community interested in these experiments? And where does the problem arise? Where does the source of ionizing radiation arise from these laser matter interactions? And we'll go into my thesis objectives. So this is just a map of the high power laser facilities located around the world. So as you can see, there's a large number of them in the United States, Europe, as well as a growing number of these facilities in Asia. And as these facilities continue to be constructed, they require radiation protection guidelines in order to design the facilities. And also for pre-existing facilities that hope to increase their laser intensity or the laser power will also need to be reevaluated. And so I've been saying high power laser a lot, so I just want to quickly go through what do I mean by high power laser. And as an example, I'll just show you is using SLAC's matter in extreme conditions. It's a facility at SLAC, and they have a laser that, as you can see, has been upgraded through the years to achieve higher and higher wattage, essentially. And this is the high power we're talking about, so in the order of terawatts. And so as a quick example, this is just a laser pointer similar to the one I'm using right now, about 5 milliwatts, compared to these high power laser systems, which can fill up a room. And so you can see from the comparison, we have 25 terawatts for these high power laser versus 5 milliwatts. So we're talking about 15 orders of magnitude difference between these laser powers. And so these are the lasers that will be generating the ionizing radiation from these experiments. And they're high powered because they take energy and they compress it within a very, very short period of time. That's how we get the high power. And I'll also be using this phrase high intensity laser. High intensity laser is just simply what happens to the high power when it's focused to micrometer spot sizes. And you commonly will see intensities in the range of 10 to 17 to 10 to the 22 watts per cm squared. So this is power per unit area. So just a quick example with the 25 terawatt laser example from earlier. If you were to focus it to a spot size of 10 micrometers, you would get about 1.6 times 10 to the 19 watts per cm squared. And here's just a schematic of an experiment at the MHC instrument that shows you just what the inside of the laser system looks like during the experiment. So you have the back of the beam entering the target chamber, and it is focused with this focusing mirror to these micrometer spot sizes. And then that laser, that high intensity laser, is then interacting with the target in the center of the chamber. So the main reason, there's many reasons why the scientific community is interested in these laser matter experiments. One of them is the study of matter under extreme conditions. How does matter behave under high energy, high density situations? What happens to matter when it's subject to high pressure and shock? And another interesting application for this is it's a potential source for proton and ion beams. From this image on the right over here, you can actually use a high power laser to generate monodirectional beams of protons or ions, depending on your target foil. They can also be used for the acceleration of electrons up to the GeV range within a few millimeters. This is with a different kind of experiment where you have gas cell targets where you can achieve electric fields on the order of GeV per millimeter. And with this application, it's also possible to generate Betatron X-ray beams, which have a wide diagnostic usage in the scientific community. And it's also, of course, used as a driver in fast ignition fusion, which is of interest to finding the next energy source. So all these experiments are great, and the scientific community is very interested in them. But during these experiments, there is a source of ionizing radiation that's generated as a byproduct of these interactions. And this generally occurs, I'll use this example for solid targets. So laser will interact with a solid target and creates a plasma layer on the surface over here on this figure. And then additional laser interactions with the plasma will accelerate electrons in the plasma, which then escape the plasma. So these are hot electrons that stream out of the plasma that's created. And these hot electrons can generate Bremsstrahlung photons when they interact with the target foil itself and the target chamber and whatever else they might interact with. But those are the two primary sources. And so this mixed field of electrons and Bremsstrahlung photons are primary sources of ionizing radiation. And as you can see on the figure, neutron generation is also possible from the high energy Bremsstrahlung via photonuclear interactions. So how do we want to tackle this problem? How do we want to characterize the ionizing radiation that's generated? So here I'm just going through the computational toolbox I used to address the problem. So EPOCH was used for characterizing the hot electron source that we talked about on the previous slide. And this used a particle and cell method, and it was able to simulate laser and plasma interactions. And for the Bremsstrahlung generation, I used FLUKA, which is a Monte Carlo method code that is useful for transport and interaction of particles, and it can even do radiation dose calculations, which is how we analyze the ionizing radiation hazard. So by coupling both codes together, this allows a complete analysis of the interaction between the laser and the target material. And I will touch on these codes more in the future sections. So this brings me to my thesis objectives. So what I wanted to do with my thesis was, of course, to characterize the hot electron source. These are the hot electrons that are accelerated in the plasma and generated from laser matter interactions. And what I want to know about this hot electron source is energy distribution, angular distribution, and also the laser to electron energy conversion efficiency. So these three components of the hot electron source will allow me to fully characterize the source. And then with the hot electron source, we want to calculate the resulting Bremsstrahlung yield from the hot electrons. And it is useful to know this as a function of laser intensity, which is calculated from the laser parameters we saw earlier. So this will give us a way to also compare to measurement data that was performed at SLAC. So with this combination, it will provide a guideline for radiation protection and hazard analysis for high intensity laser facilities. And this is both at SLAC and at the growing number of facilities around the world. So next we'll step into the hot electron source characterization, and that'll include the EPOCH plasma physics code that I used, as well as the components of the hot electron source term. So just a quick overview of EPOCH. So EPOCH is a particle and cell code, and it's used to study high energy density physics and laser plasma interactions. So in this code, it's not a Monte Carlo code, so it's more of a finite difference time domain code where you have particles in the system and you want to see what happens to the particles as a result of different forces on them. The forces being the electromagnetic field of the laser itself. And so in this code, physical particles such as the electrons that we're interested in, they're represented by a smaller number of macroparticles. And this kind of code is suitable for femtosecond timescale and micrometer size scale simulations, which is exactly what we need with a femtosecond laser that's giving us the high power and focusing it down to micrometer spot sizes. And so in this code, the way it works utilizes a particle pusher. It moves charged particles in space that are under the influence of EM fields calculated, and it calculates the currents due to particle motions. And then it's coupled with the field solver, which solves Maxwell's equations on a fixed spatial grid, subject to the currents calculated from the particle motions. So these two solvers loop and iterate through in order to allow you to look at laser plasma simulations on a time-by-time basis. So what does it look like at this time step? What does it look like at the next time step when the particles have moved due to the electromagnetic fields? Sorry? Oh, 2D. This is a two-dimensional code. There is three-dimensional capability, but it is very, very computationally heavy and doesn't, because of the symmetrical geometry, there was no need to do 3D. So just really quickly, some of the laser input for the EPOCH code. So of course you need to input your laser with an intensity in watts per cm squared and also with a wavelength. And so for this simulation, a Gaussian profile and intensity and time was used. So a full with half max pulse length of 40 femtoseconds, and also a radial spot size of 4 micrometer. And recall on the previous slide, this code is ideal for these situations. Again, the femtosecond time scale, the micrometer size scale. And just some system parameters to give you an idea. So the 2D spatial system consists, the simulation box I use, 20 microns by 20 microns in a 400 by 400 grid, and then different boundary conditions to the simulation. And the plasma is composed, of course, of the electrons and ions with a plasma density ramp given by this exponential. And what EPOCH gives us is the ability to track particle information over time. It includes position, energy, momentum, and also this weighting of the macroparticles that we talked about. And this allows us to fully characterize the hot electron source term. And I just want to reemphasize on that particular matters, the energy distribution, angular distribution, and what is the yield, what is the conversion efficiency. And so here I just want to give you an idea of how the code works. So these are snapshots of the code over every 10 femtosecond time. So I'll just let it run through and try to explain to you what's going on. So this is an animation of the electron density per grid every 10 femtoseconds. So you can see the laser entering the system from the left, and it's incident on this plasma with a density ramp defined down right here. And you can see the hot electrons flying out of the plasma in both the forward and backward directions. So this is just how the code works and gives you an idea. So here again, this is I stopped it at 150 femtoseconds, and again you just see hot electrons streaming out of the plasma. And this is just instead of the electron density that we're looking at now, we're now looking at the electron kinetic energy. So you can see these hot electrons with this logarithmic scale from 1 keV to 10 MeV. So you can see these 10 MeV, electrons streaming forward in the forward direction. So by tracking these hot electrons, we were able to characterize its energy distribution. And so the energy distribution of these hot electrons were fitted with a Maxwellian distribution given by this equation here. And the key parameter for this fitting is this TH, this hot electron temperature. And we see from the simulation results, this example is for 10 to the 20 watts per cm squared, that the electrons inside the system are composed of a cold component and a hot component. And of course, this figure on the right shows the hot electrons that are streaming out of the plasma. So this is snapshots over time. So this was like the frame by frame look that we saw earlier. And then the figure on the right is more of like an integration of the hot electrons streaming out. So you can see that the hot electrons are given by this Maxwellian distribution, and fitting both curves to the Maxwellian gives very similar TH values, which is, yes.
This is not Monte Carlo, right? Why would you get so much fluctuations? It's high energy.
The high energy.
Why isn't that?
Because when you simulate, when you set up the code, you have a finite number of particles. Right, this finite number of macro particles, and so you can see at the lower energies it's very smooth, but once you get to the high energies, there's actually just less. Right, there's less electrons being accelerated to these high energies. So the statistics are just a little less the farther you go down, or the higher you go in energy.
So the epoch still has statistics.
Correct. It has some. So this hot electron temperature, it agrees well with what we see in literature with this J cross B heating, and with comparison to the theoretical information, it actually agrees very well. And there's also an uncertainty associated with this TH value when fitting to these curves, and that's included here. And so the fit for the epoch calculated hot electron temperature is given by just the simple formula here from this the blue curve that you see. So that's our hot electron temperature that describes the energy distribution of the electrons. So now we'll move on to the angular distribution, which is also a very key component. So the angular distribution was fitted with a Gaussian distribution, as shown here, where theta is the angle with respect to the laser direction. And the angular distribution I found was consistent between these intensities and was commonly characterized by the sigma parameter of 45 degrees and plus or minus 5 degrees. And so you can also see from the figure, this is the hot electron streaming in a forward direction for 10 to the 20 watts per cm squared, and in the backward direction as well. So you can also, besides just the angular distribution fitting, you can also see there's a forward and backward direction ratio information that's also learned from this. And so from this hot electron forward to backward ratio, I can also plot it as a function of laser intensity. So this is our laser parameter. So we can characterize the angular distribution in the forward and backward directions also with this. And so finally, that brings us to the yield of the hot electron. So how much of the laser energy is converted into the hot electron energy? And so with the calculations, it was found that it scales with intensity up to, and it starts to plateau around 60%. So the other curves that you see shown are previous models or previous works where they try to characterize this conversion efficiency. And it was actually found that this conversion efficiency is very different. It varies between different reported literature, and it's rather hard to actually characterize in the experiment. But because this thesis is to identify guidelines for radiation protection, this curve, since it's a little more conservative than previous models, this was used. And it was also from the simulation results. And so now we'll move on to the Bremsstrahlung dose yield calculations after we've covered the hot electron source. And this will cover FLUKA, which is the radiation transport interaction code that I used, and also the components and the complexity of this Bremsstrahlung dose field, and also some comparison to measurement data from MEC. So FLUKA is a Monte Carlo method code, and it implements modern physics models for over 60 particle types. It can simulate these particles interacting with matter and also propagating through matter. And so FLUKA can also, in addition to this, can handle custom and often complex input sources. So this means we can fully simulate our hot electron source with complete energy and angular distribution information. FLUKA can also handle complex geometries, such as a target vacuum chamber. So this is the target vacuum chamber from the matter and extreme conditions instrument at SLAC. So this is the actual FLUKA geometry that was simulated that you can actually use to try to reproduce experimental results. And so FLUKA can also, with all this, can perform dose calculations. So this meaning the Bremsstrahlung, what is the Bremsstrahlung dose yield from hot electrons? So this is how we evaluate the radiation hazard from these laser matter experiments. And so I just want to quickly just define this. Bremsstrahlung dose yield is the ambient dose equivalent units of millisieverts of the photons and is normalized to the laser energy in joules on target. So this is a parameter that lets us relate a radiation hazard to a laser parameter. And so just kind of give you a quick summary of how it works. So here, the FLUKA input, you have a Maxwellian hot electron source with an angular distribution, with a yield, with conversion efficiency, with your geometry. So these components, once you sum them all together, it'll give you this Bremsstrahlung dose yield that we're interested in. And so this is just an example of what you can do with FLUKA's capabilities. So this is the target chamber. You have the laser coming in this direction. There's a target at the center, and you can generate this Bremsstrahlung dose profile in 3 dimensions if wanted. And so just real quickly, I'll just go through some of the FLUKA methodology I use. So for developing this, for characterizing the Bremsstrahlung dose yield, I just used a simple geometry with a cylindrical target chamber with uniform thickness walls, used a 2 centimeter by 2 centimeter copper foil with a thickness on the order of micrometers or millimeters that's optimized for each laser intensity. And so here's just a picture of what this geometry looks like in FLUKA. So you can see there was also additional several assumptions. So there's nothing in the target chamber when I'm simulating. We saw in the earlier picture the target chamber is often filled with optics equipment. And what we're interested in is what's the dose out here, outside of a uniform target chamber, which I assumed was this. But as we saw from previous slide, it's often not uniform. But these are assumptions that were made. So components of this Bremsstrahlung dose yield. So you have Bremsstrahlung dose that's generated from the target due to forward and backward hot electrons. And you also have Bremsstrahlung dose that's generated from hot electrons that escape the target and interact with the aluminum wall. Right here, yes, the 2.54 centimeter aluminum wall. So this just shows you the complexity of the Bremsstrahlung dose. So the dashed curves down here are the different components in the 0 degree laser direction. So it's in the forward direction of the laser pulse. And these are the different components that add up to this total sum of all these components at 0 degrees. So you can see just some quick observations from this, that the dose is primarily from forward hot electrons generating Bremsstrahlung with the target. So that's this red dashed curve at the top. You see that it's pretty much dominating over the other curves, except at the lower intensities, where a large fraction of the backscatter from backward streaming hot electrons. So again, this is earlier we saw that the forward and backward ratio becomes more backward directed at the lower intensities. You also see that Bremsstrahlung dose generated from the aluminum walls is about a factor of 10 to 20 lower than the dose generated from the target. And this is for the 0 direction. So we're seeing the large majority of hot electrons in the forward direction are interacting with the target chamber already.
So this is it's inside or outside?
So right. So the curves that say target, well, these are all out. This is all for the target. This is inside the chamber, so, because I wanted to show it without aluminum attenuation. But with the aluminum wall, this is with attenuation. So there's a little bit of a difference, but I'll show you on the next slide how it comes together and try to explain that a little more. But it is outside the chamber. So here is a summary of the Bremsstrahlung dose yield as a function of laser intensity down here. So this is, again, laser intensity is the the parameter of interest, this watts per cm squared describes these high power lasers. And also for several angles that are pretty important. So the 0 degree angle, 45, 90, and 180. So this just shows you that for each intensity, we are able to look at the two-dimensional dose. And so this is also with 2.5 more centimeters of aluminum attenuation factor applied. So for the dose generated at the target, you need to apply this 2.54 centimeter aluminum attenuation factor for outside, because I don't think there will ever be a situation where there's someone inside the target chamber. So everything is always outside the target chamber. And then, but this factor was not applied twice for dose generated from the wall. So it's only for, so this attenuation factor was only applied for dose generated from the target.
And, I was reading the second half of your thesis. Obviously, you put some small centimeters inside the chamber because you really want to know how much dose really created from electrons themselves.
Right.
Before you, other than the Bremsstrahlung. But of course, outside the chamber is really many different Bremsstrahlung. Right?
Correct.
So because one important thing is that you need to first verify the accuracy of your source term of your FLUKA.
Right. I know we verified the source term with we had an electron spectra measurement that we compared to, and then later on I'll actually have a slide where we compare, if I use the hot electron source in the FLUKA simulation, I can compare to the measurement data to additionally confirm the source term.
The hot electron spectrum actually compared well with the measurement test.
Yes, and I have a slide, an extra slide that addresses that. I'll remember to touch on. So we also want to compare our Bremsstrahlung dose yield to actual measurement data. So here's just a summary of the high intensity laser solid experiments that I participated in while at SLAC. During these experiments, there was an assortment of solid foils, copper, aluminum, nickel, with micron scale thicknesses. So we're talking about 2 to 3 micrometers up to 100 micrometers. And so this is just a summary of the parameters from the 4 experiments. And so the uncertainties in the peak laser intensity are also shown here in percentages. And this is due to variations in laser parameters. This is just part of the uncertainty analysis of the measurements. So this just shows you some of the data that was collected from these Bremsstrahlung dose measurements. So these were performed with an assortment of detectors, including pocket ion chambers, electron dosimeters, and active readout ion chambers. So this example on the left shows you the Bremsstrahlung dose rate outside the target chamber for this experiment, the July 2014 experiment, for 3 different targets. So you have 5 micrometer copper, 15 micrometer nickel, and 100 micrometer copper. So here you can see the Bremsstrahlung dose yield is about, you could say, between 20 to 30 microsieverts per hour outside of the target chamber. And here is just the same experiment, but showing you the different angles that were measured and from the perspective of the target chamber plane. So the Bremsstrahlung dose yield from the measurements can be plotted as a function of laser intensity. So here we can see the 4 experiments that I participated in 2014. And I also managed to obtain data from 2 other experiments, one at SLAC and one at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. So one of the key takeaways from this is you can see an improvement in laser characterization over the years. So starting in 2011, the uncertainties on the laser parameters were not all that well characterized, and commonly, even just maybe 5 years ago, and you'll see in literature, people say we had a laser intensity on the order of 10 to the 20. So it was kind of a rough estimate. So you can see that over the years, so this data down here is from 2012, and these are from 2014, that the laser scientists were able to better characterize the laser parameters as they improve their techniques and as they have more experience with these experiments. Sorry? The uncertainty was given as a that I calculate here as a plus. It's like a plus or minus uncertainty, and it's from, like, say they measured the pulse energy. It was 0.7 joules, but there's a plus or minus uncertainty associated with that of 0.1. And then you have the spot size measurement, which might also have a small uncertainty associated with that. So it's essentially just a propagation of error onto the measurement data. So parameters that affect the laser intensity give it its uncertainty in X, and then parameters that affect the actual dose measurement and this normalization to this dose yield parameter are given in Y.
Those sort of points are a little surprising. Do you have that range of values?
This one?
Are you saying that for all of that range of values, the dose range is always going to be that?
Right. Oh, so you mean why is there a vertical spread?
Why is there such a huge horizontal spread?
Why is there a huge horizontal spread? Right, because for this experiment, one of the laser, say for example, the energy on the target that's actually contributing to the ionizing radiation, there might be a large uncertainty. Right, and then right. So that is one thing. So the laser intensity range is 5 orders of magnitudes, and then here's 7 orders of magnitudes. Right. So there's a vertical and horizontal spread due to some error, and also the vertical spread is also a component of you're measuring at different angles, which might have different material thickness of the target chamber that might affect it. So there's several components that compound into that. And so if we compare to the Bremsstrahlung curves from earlier, we can see that there's a pretty good agreement with the curves. So I removed the uncertainties here just to reduce the clutter to help us compare to measurement data. So this the solid curve is for the 0 degree direction. So we can see that it does a pretty good job in encompassing the large majority of the data points. Again, this up here was an experiment where the laser parameters were not characterized as well. So there's possibility that this is when you're normalized to the laser pulse energy for dose yield, this could be lower, but there's some uncertainty here. But this is just a comparison to show how the measurement data compares with the curves. And so if we actually take the hot electron source term and we actually try to simulate the actual experiment, we can analyze the dose yield profile even further. So this is an example from the August 2014 experiment with a laser intensity of 10 to the 19 watts per cm squared. So for the simulation I tried to match as closely as possible the actual parameters from the experiment. So I used this 10 to the 19th to decide what is the hot electron energy distribution, angular distribution, and yield. And here you can see a 2-dimensional plane view of the target chamber. So you can see these are the uneven parts with the viewports here. And so the laser is actually coming this direction, but in the simulation, you just simulate the hot electrons, not the actual laser. So here you can see the Bremsstrahlung dose profile in the forward and backward directions. And you can see some of the things we touched on earlier. So the larger majority of the Bremsstrahlung is generated from the target interaction. And you actually see there is a bit of Bremsstrahlung dose that's actually also generated from hot electrons that escape the target and interact with the aluminum wall. So if we just look at the profile outside the target chamber, we can also compare two measurements because we know what the angle that each measurement was taken. So you can see that this is our measurement data from this experiment compared to the dose yield. One's at closer distance to the center. So all the distances at 1.1 meters means 1.1 meters from the laser target interaction location. So we can see that it follows the angular profile pretty well. You see it increasing as it gets close to 0 degrees and then decreasing as you get to 90 degrees before going back up again. And so this gives us pretty good confidence that our hot electron source term is confirmed through our measurements. One of the reasons why it's typically lower than the measurements is during these experiments, there's laser variation, so shot by shot variation in the laser intensity that's not accounted for in the simulation because the simulation assumes optimum yield parameters. So we can expect that the simulation results will be higher than the measuring data. And so now that we've looked at the hot electron source and we've characterized the Bremsstrahlung dose yield, which is our hazard, how do we address this ionizing radiation hazard? One of the ways to do so is with shielding. And we'll look at some of the shielding calculations I performed, and including the transmission factors for common materials and the derivation of 10th value layers. So with the hot electron source, we can generate Bremsstrahlung and calculate transmission factors for Bremsstrahlung photons generated from a hot electron source. And this can be done for a wide variety of materials. So these were the 6 I chose for my thesis, which are pretty common materials at these experimental halls. So glass, concrete, aluminum, iron, lead, and tungsten. And here is an example that shows you the FLUKA calculated transmission factors as a function of concrete thickness for laser intensities, again, between 10 to the 17 to 10 to the 22. So this is the full range of laser intensity. So each different color curve represents the transmission factors for concrete at a different intensity. And here you can see from this, we can actually figure out how much shielding is needed to reduce the Bremsstrahlung intensity or the Bremsstrahlung dose by a factor of 10, and how much is needed to reduce by an additional factor of 10. So this is how we derive these 10th value layer shielding thicknesses. Again, the 10th value layer is the thickness at which the intensity, in this case, our dose of the radiation, in this case, our Bremsstrahlung photons, that are entering the material is reduced by a factor of 1/10. So here I just show you two of the TVL, 10th value layers often just abbreviate TVL, of concrete and also of lead. And so there's also TVL1, which is the first 10th value layer, and also here is 10th value E, which is the subsequent layers. So some of the key observations you can see already, because it's plotted as a function of laser intensity, is obviously you need more shielding as you increase laser intensity because the energy of the hot electrons is increasing with laser intensity. And one of the interesting things you start seeing is at the high intensities. So up here, this is when you start reaching easily tens of MeV in electron energy. You start seeing this buildup factor occur at the higher intensities. Here for concrete and here for lead. And so this also is something that is good to characterize because when a radiation protection program is doing a shielding analysis, oftentimes they'll be looking at more than just one TVL. So it's good to know, okay, I need this much TVL, say 50 centimeters of concrete for subsequent layers, but the first layer I need maybe about 60. And also another interesting thing to compare to is the lead TVL values. So you can see as the laser intensity increases and the electron energy increases with it, you start to plateau off at the high electron energies due to reaching the conflict minimum. And so this is just a quick summary of the TVL values that I calculated. So again, this is for the full laser intensity for all 6 material types, given as TVL1 and also TVLE. So just some quick observations we can make from these figures is that the higher Z materials, lead and tungsten, which are these two bottom curves in purple and yellow, they're the most effective. And what I mean by most effective is you need less shielding to attenuate the dose by a factor of 10. You also see that materials with similar mass densities like glass, concrete, aluminum have similar TVL values. So these are the top 3 curves up here, which all makes sense. So here, now we've covered hot electron source and the Bremsstrahlung dose, and then how we address this hazard and how we shield against it. I'll just finish out with a summary. And so I just want to retouch on the thesis objectives that I went to tackle with this study. So again, this was to characterize the hot electron source We looked at the energy distribution of the hot electrons, which had a Maxwellian distribution characterized by a hot electron temperature. We looked at the angular distribution, which was Gaussian with a sigma parameter of 45 degrees. And we also looked at the laser to electron energy conversion efficiency, which we saw that with higher laser intensities, there's more yield. There's more conversion of energy to the electrons. We also calculated the resulting Bremsstrahlung yield from the hot electron source and as a function of laser intensity. And we looked at a comparison to measurement data. So again, this is the objective of the thesis was to provide a guideline for radiation protection. One of these ways to address this is, of course, the shielding TVL values that we looked at, and to provide a hazard analysis for these types of facilities. So again, this is just a summary of what was covered today. And so in conjunction with our shielding TVL values, the Bremsstrahlung dose yield calculations and estimate provide a guideline for radiation protection and hazard analysis for laser solid interactions between 10 to the 17th and 10 to the 22 watts per cm squared for high intensity laser facilities, which can be applied to facilities both at SLAC and also those around the world. And so with that, I conclude my presentation, and thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Okay, so do we have questions from the audience? Maybe the officers. We'll start with Steve.
Maybe you mentioned it before, but I didn't catch it. Your dose rates outside were some of go to 30 microsieverts per hour?
This one?
Yeah.
Yes.
So how long are these things typically run for?
So these experiments, typically when we do the hazard analysis for these experiments, the experimenters come to us and they're saying, we want to do this experiment with this target type, and we want to do, say, 10,000 laser shots on the target. So here is just showing you dose rate, but it's also possible from this, because we know the laser repetition rate and the energy behind each laser pulse, to perform an estimate of how much dose is generated per shot. So with, say, 10,000 laser shots, which is pretty typical in the experiment, you can be up to the orders of REM outside because each laser shot, like boom, 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 each one will generate dose, and that can quickly add up over the course of an experiment. Yes.
So did you use FLUKA instead of MCMP because FLUKA you could run a bunch more particle types?
So one of the main reasons I chose FLUKA was the FLUKA is the code that was primarily used by the radiation protection group and physics group at SLAC, and several of the people in that group they actually are like some of the top guns in the code. So it's just easier for me to learn the code if I just walked over to the room like, hey, can I ask you this question? And they're like, oh yeah, let me show you how to do this. So that's one of the main reasons I chose it, because who I had access to in my immediate area, they all use FLUKA. And it also, MCMP, I haven't considered, I mean, I didn't use it for this, but I assume it also has, I'm not as fluent with MCMP, but I assume you can also do dose calculations, you can do Bremsstrahlung generation. But I used what was more readily accessible.
Any other questions from the? We'll go to the committee.
Okay,
Oh.
similar question
I-
on that FLUKA calculation. So in your Bremsstrahlung calculation, obviously this Monte Carlo base, you should have Bremsstrahlung energy spectrum first produced, right?
Correct.
And then I suppose you just multiply by a conversion factor to take the dose, right?
Correct. That's how it's done.
So I think it would be very nice that if you can actually show a figure
Oh, okay.
of the Bremsstrahlung spectrum.
Okay.
And when you explain this 10th layer thing
Mhm.
as a function of laser intensity,
Mhm.
you mentioned that in the 10th layer actually increases dramatically
Right.
as the intensity increases. That is really because your spectrum get hotter.
Right.
It's more difficult to shoot.
Correct. Correct.
Otherwise, it should be flat.
Right. Right. Okay. That's very good. Thank you.
That will actually explain things very
Okay.
easily. That's one thing. The other thing thing is can you explain the physical mechanism why you were showing this nice, interesting conversion efficiency that can go up to 60%. Like laser power actually gets 60% energy converted to electron energy. What's the mechanism?
Okay. Actually, I do have some extra slides prepared just for those questions. So there's several key heating mechanisms that are So I didn't touch on it, but in order for the electrons in the plasma to actually be accelerated, there's several mechanisms that occur. So so here's just a summary of some electron heating mechanisms that occur during laser matter interactions. So these heating mechanisms are heavily dependent on laser wave. Well, it's dependent on how the plasma scale length relates to laser wavelength. Plasma scale length is how the density of the plasma ramps up. So right here, there's several different heating mechanisms that can occur. The one that we're primarily interested in is this J cross B or Ponder motive heating. So this occurs when the force that a charged particle, so such as an electron in our case, in the plasma, experiences in an oscillating electric field, and that would be from our laser pulse impinging on the plasma. And it's just given by this formula. And then this J cross B force of the Ponder motive takes effect at laser intensities of greater than 10 to the 18th watts per cm squared. So this is where the magnetic field component is also helping to drive electron acceleration. So this is the Ponder motive force or acceleration is the primary mechanism towards electron heating. And so this is primary for the intensity range we're interested in, this high intensity region. At lower intensities, there's also a resonance absorption, which is, it's again, it has to do with when the electromagnetic wave, so the laser itself is impinging on the plasma, it drives electrons with essentially it's electric with the resonance of the plasma itself. As the resonance of the plasma, it's like waves. Think of it like a surfer on a wave. It's generating these waves and it's propagating the electrons out. But this is typically only dominant at this lower intensity range, which was pretty much outside of the range that I was looking at.
So at the lower power or low intensity, it's just that it hasn't really reached this technical level.
Right.
So that the acceleration, so the energy picked up by electrons is not as
right. Because and also because resonance absorption and Ponder motive and the other heating mechanisms, they're all occurring to a certain degree at all stages. But it all depends on what's more dominant at that different stage. So at the lower ones, you only have resonance absorption, which is dominant, and then at the higher intensities, you start adding on to it so now you have this Ponder motive force where the electron's oscillating with the electric field, and then at even higher intensities, the magnetic field component is no longer negligible. So you're just adding on to how much you can accelerate the electrons. So that's why we saw this increase in the conversion. It does eventually saturate, which I can guess it has to do with how far the laser actually penetrates into the plasma. So because if it only can penetrate to a certain degree, then you start to stop conversion. But this is actually a really hot research topic as well, trying to optimize this absorption, right? And so there's a lot of studies and literature on this efficiency. How can we increase it to? So some literature, they have special techniques. They say we can get 90% efficiency, or there's other papers that say, no, we can only get to this much. So I think I briefly talked about this. It's a pretty difficult thing to look at, but for the purpose of this, we use the code to give us our conversion efficiency.
Last real quick.
Okay.
So you were showing some results. You have your thesis. You wrote that the experiment actually did 100 shots, right? Laser shots. Each shot you mean 40 femtoseconds. Is that It's just one pulse, is it or not?
Right, one pulse. Oh, are you talking about
You were showing some results.
like this result?
No,
Or?
not this, quite a few back. Yeah, yeah, things like.
Oh, right. Okay.
You have a bunch of these pulses.
Right. So this is actually right. So during the experiment, this is just time, and so these are there's actually if we zoom in on each of these little peaks, it's actually composed of a lot of little peaks, many little pulses.
That was the question because I looked at here.
Right.
This is a lot wider.
Right.
That's 40 seconds.
Right. This is there's if we actually zoom in, there are many little pulses, and the reason you actually see this separation in these bunches of pulses is right. They have to swap the target because you want fresh target with each shot. And I actually have a slide. I'll give you a better idea on how that works in case y'all are interested. Let's see, where is it? Here we go. So it's done with a target rastering system. So you can see these rows of shots here. So the separation you saw between the peaks is when they have to shift it to get a new row.
Good job.
Thank you.
I wonder if you have the figure and compare your results with Hayashi and Yu.
Yes, I do. Where is it? Yes.
It's interesting that you see a tumor surviving reproduction
Right.
of your model. Can you go into that?
Right. So Hayashi's model, when he originally developed it, he assumed a much harder hot electron spectrum. So that's one of the factors. He also used he also used a high yield or conversion efficiency, and he didn't have any angular distribution information, so he just assumed the entire electron source was a pencil beam going in one direction. So you're losing. So you have factors such as a harder energy distribution, a high yield. You lose the angular information, so everything is just monodirectional onto the target. And he also used a high Z tantalum target, so which to generate as much Bremsstrahlung as possible. So those four components actually combined will give you this such a high dose yield. Did I answer?
Yeah, I'm still a little perplexed. Factor of 100 difference. I mean, I understand. Have you tried validating the model to
Yes.
match his conditions and get close to what he got?
Yes, I did do a check to make sure I could, using his conditions, I was able to get his curve. So that was done before I actually did this, just to see basically just to check his results.
And this was computational or raw? Computational. Did they do any experiments?
No, this was computation. I believe he used Geon 4 to do that, to do the fluence calculation, and then he folded the fluence calculation with the dose conversion factors to get this ambient dose equivalent.
I understand it.
The sound that I have in I actually basically use the conversion factor and then assume it's electron hitting the 15 target and use the full absorption and then pick down like target and use IAEA 188. So it's a relatively simplistic.
Right.
Internal discussion is.
Any other questions? I have lots of backup slides. So I can... Oh, thank you.
I'm looking at your EPOCH and FLUKA. Where do they connect to each other?
So they connect to each other when I take let's see. Let me see if I can find. Oh, here it is. So the EPOCH result gives us the energy distribution. So in FLUKA, I would generate the energy distribution of an electron source based on what the EPOCH result gave me, and then the angular information again from EPOCH. And then the yield is more for the normalization of the result. But these two components were the big parts where in FLUKA, you could generate a custom source where you could say, I want to sample an electron energy distribution from a Maxwellian, and then I want to sample the angular distribution from a Gaussian. And then you can also say, add an additional component where, oh, there's a certain ratio of forward to backward angular dependence. Oh, yes. Yes. So that's always, it's possible to sample from an arbitrary distribution as well. Mhm.
Target is when you're simulating a laser, there is still the target beyond that.
Correct.
You determine how deep the width of your plasma.
Correct. So let me go back to that. Like this, or yeah. So in the EPOCH simulation, you simulate laser and plasma, correct? Not the actual target. So here you can see the target, the actual target itself. Well, this is the plasma that's coming off of. So the target would actually be back here, but EPOCH doesn't simulate target. So this simulation is just of the plasma, and so this is something I had to initialize. So it has this density ramp here, and then it increases up to a certain thickness before it stops. And so one of the key components of laser and plasma interaction, let me jump ahead, is the critical density of the plasma. This is in part of my extra slides right here. So the critical density is the density to which a laser pulse is able to propagate in a plasma, upon which the pulse energy is partially absorbed with some fraction reflected. And this is completely dependent on the wavelength of the incoming laser pulse. So the thickness of the plasma that I initialized in EPOCH had to be of enough depth such that the laser pulse would fully interact with the plasma target. So that's why you see it shown as such. And so for a titanium sapphire laser of this, it's about 1.8 times 10 to the 22 cm cubed. And let me see if I can actually do a comparison with the EPOCH slide. Let's see. Okay, right. So this is meters cubed, so 22. And this 128. So right, it'd be somewhere right here, around this. Right. So the laser pulse is actually stopped somewhere around here. But what you're actually seeing is the electron density being pushed by the laser pulse. But the laser itself would stop somewhere about here. But there would be continued interactions from the energy that the laser gives to the plasma. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was curious how you determine the thickness.
Okay. Is that it? I have plenty of extra slides. Maybe maybe you have on the cover.
I guess right now we'll ask the visitors to leave, and the committee will stay with them for a minute. So
Okay.
if there's anything else they want to ask you.
Sounds good. For those of y'all online, thank you for joining. I will be closing the screen share now. I will announce the results on Facebook, yes. But thank you so much for joining. Yes. Yes, definitely. I somehow let a couple of beginning titles